The story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. In the biblical narrative, Lot is a secondary character who plays a crucial role in the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, two cities known for their wickedness. The story, as found in the book of Genesis, offers a window into the morality and divine principles that lie at the heart of a certain religious approach. Lot, nephew of Abraham, the patriarch, decides to settle in Sodom, a place that, by then, already enjoyed a reputation for dissipated living. His choice of residence was not without warning. The moral corruption and violence of the region were well known, yet Lot prospered there, becoming a figure of some influence. In parallel, Abraham maintains a close relationship with God, who reveals his intention to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness. Abraham, fearful of his nephew's fate, pleads for the lives of the righteous who might reside there. It is then that God makes the promise not to destroy the cities if at least 10 righteous people are found within them. However, their fate was already sealed. Only a few deserved the title of righteous. Lot is visited by 2 angels, sent by God to warn him of the impending disaster. They find refuge in Lot's house, where he hosts them with exemplary hospitality, even in a city where hospitality was a largely forgotten virtue. The night becomes tense as the men of Sodom demand to meet the visitors, revealing the depravity that dominated the city. Lot, in a desperate act of protection, even offers his own daughters to protect his guests, a gesture that highlights the moral complexity present in the story. Finally, the angels reveal their mission to Lot. He must leave the city with his family, without looking back. At the climax of the story, Sodom and Gomorrah are consumed by fire and brimstone, obliterated from the face of the earth. Lot's family flees, but his wife, in a moment of doubt or nostalgia, disobeys the warning and looks back, turning into a pillar of salt. This story not only illustrates divine punishment but also highlights themes of justice, obedience, and the moral choices faced by humankind in a context of corruption and chaos. Lot emerges as a figure of tenacity. The Egyptian Empire. The Egyptian Empire is one of the most fascinating periods in ancient history, characterized by its architectural, cultural, and religious splendor. Its history spans approximately from 3100 BC, with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under Pharaoh Narmer, to the conquest of the country by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. During this vast span of time, Egypt witnessed the rise and fall of various dynasties that consolidated the power of an empire whose influence expanded beyond its borders. The pyramids, iconic symbols of Egyptian civilization, are one of its most significant architectural legacies. Built primarily during the period known as the Old Kingdom, the pyramids served as monumental tombs for pharaohs and nobles. The most famous of all is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BC. Under the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. This colossal mausoleum is the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing, and represents the pinnacle of Egyptian engineering and labor organization. Each pyramid was not only a tomb but also a complex that included temples, processional roads, and mastabas for the pharaoh's officials. Within these structures, the walls were often adorned with hieroglyphics and symbolic art that told stories about the afterlife and the religious ceremonies essential to the pharaoh's passage to the world of the gods. The construction of the pyramids reflected the Egyptians' profound knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. They were precisely oriented according to the cardinal points, and many of their alignments correlated with celestial events. The construction methods are still a subject of debate and fascination. However, it is believed that a laborious combination of skilled labor, primitive technology, and efficient resource management contributed to the construction of these majestic structures. Thus, The pyramids not only encapsulate the grandeur of Egypt's past but also act as a bridge to a deeper understanding of its mythology. In ancient times, under the scorching Egyptian sun, stood the figure of Moses, a Hebrew raised in the bosom of Pharaoh's court. One afternoon, while tending his father-in-law's flock in the desert, he came across a burning bush from which emanated the voice of God himself. God entrusted him with the task of freeing his people from Egyptian oppression. Moses, accompanied by his brother Aaron, had a mission as formidable as it was dangerous. With the divine command clear in his heart, Moses appeared before Pharaoh, demanding the release of the children of Israel. However, Pharaoh was a stubborn man and refused time and again. In response, God unleashed a series of plagues upon Egypt, each one more devastating than the last, to soften the monarch's heart and demonstrate his power. The first plague turned the waters of the Nile into blood. This caused suffering throughout the country. However, the pharaoh stood his ground. The second plague brought an invasion of frogs that covered the land, but the pharaoh remained steadfast. This was followed by the third plague of lice, and the fourth, of flies, wreaking havoc on Egypt. Even so, the pharaoh did not capitulate. The fifth plague attacked the livestock with a terrible pestilence, while the sixth unleashed boils on Egyptians and animals. When the pharaoh persisted in his refusal, the seventh plague brought hail that devastated the crops. The eighth, a swarm of locusts that devoured what little remained, was followed by the ninth plague, a palpable darkness that hung over Egypt for 3 days. Surprisingly, as his empire crumbled, the pharaoh still did not yield. Finally, the 10th and final plague announced by Moses was the most feared, the death of the Egyptian firstborn. The cry of lamentation rose from every home in Egypt, breaking even Pharaoh's defiant spirit. Only then did he allow the Israelites to leave. With a mixture of sadness and hope, Moses led his people out of slavery and into the Promised Land. Through the Red Sea, followed by a new life, the Israelites left behind the terrible plagues that had been necessary to obtain their freedom. Thus, the story of Moses became established as an example of the power of faith and obedience to God's will. In the vast expanse of the Valley of Mexico, where the sun rises, bringing life to the watery mirrors of Lake Texcoco, one of the most fascinating and complex civilizations in history was born, the Aztecs. Originally from Aztlan, a mythical land from which they took their name, these people arrived in the valley in search of a place promised by their gods. The Aztecs' journey was not easy. They had to face different tribes and the harsh terrain. However, guided by a prophecy that they would find an eagle devouring a snake on a cactus, they finally managed to establish their empire on the islet of Lake Texcoco. Thus, in 1325, they founded Tenochtitlan, the city that would become the heart of Aztec power. The city of Tenochtitlan was a marvel of engineering. Among its canals, temples, and floating gardens stood the Templo Mayor, the spiritual and political center of the empire. There, priests performed sacrifices to honor their many gods, including Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain. These spiritual practices were vital to the Aztecs, as they believed that the balance of the universe depended on keeping their gods happy. Under the leadership of great Teletones like Moctezuma I and Moctezuma II, the empire expanded, conquering new lands and peoples. This expansion not only provided them with material wealth but also human tributes for their religious rituals. Aztec society was divided into different classes: nobility, priests, warriors, merchants, and farmers, each group playing specific roles that sustained the political and social structure of the empire. However, the arrival of the Spanish, led by Hernán Cortés, in 1519 marked the beginning of the end for the Aztecs. Alliances with enemy peoples, diseases brought by Europeans, and superior weapons led to the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521. From then on, the Aztec civilization was subdued and eventually extinguished. Despite their disappearance, the legacy of the Aztecs lives on. Their agricultural innovations, advances in astronomy, and rich mythology continue to fascinate and inspire generations, encapsulating a pivotal chapter in the history of Mesoamerica. The story of King David and his son Solomon is one of the most iconic narratives in the Bible and has transcended the centuries as a tale filled with teachings, drama, and spiritual lessons. Before becoming king, David was a young shepherd boy chosen by God to become the leader of Israel. His courage became famous after the legendary battle against Goliath, the Philistine giant, whom he defeated using only a sling and a stone. This act of heroism catapulted David to prominence and eventually to royalty after the death of King Saul. However, David's path to the throne was not without its difficulties and vicissitudes. He had to face political intrigue, betrayals, and wars. David's reign was fundamentally characterized by his desire to unify the tribes of Israel and establish a solid capital in Jerusalem. Under his leadership, Israel expanded and prospered, and it was in this context that his son Solomon was born, the fruit of his relationship with Bathsheba. Solomon was chosen by God to succeed David. David, aware of his advanced age and the external and internal pressures, worked hard to prepare Solomon for the throne. The transition was not without challenges, as another of David's sons, Adonijah, also coveted the crown. However, through a series of astute political maneuvers, David managed to ensure that Solomon would succeed him. Once crowned, Solomon soon became known for his wisdom, a quality for which he is best known. His judgment in the famous case of the two women fighting over the maternity of a child exemplifies his mental acuity and justice. During his reign, Solomon led Israel into a golden age of peace and prosperity. He commissioned the construction of the splendid temple in Jerusalem, thus fulfilling his father David's dream. However, their rule also faced criticism, especially for high taxes and their policy of marriage alliances. These alliances with neighboring kingdoms introduced foreign cults to Israel. The story of David and Solomon is an exploration of the quest for justice, the importance of wisdom, and the consequences of personal ambitions. Both kings left a lasting legacy that continues to be a subject of reflection and veneration in Judeo-Christian culture.
Story of the birth and crucifixion of Jesus. The story of the birth and crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most significant and revered stories in Christian tradition. According to the New Testament Gospels, Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem, in humble circumstances but marked by miracles and fulfilled prophecies. The birth of Jesus is celebrated every year at Christmas. The biblical narrative describes how Mary and Joseph traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem due to a census ordered by the Roman emperor. Mary, being pregnant, gave birth to Jesus in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Angels announced his arrival to shepherds in the region, who then came to worship the newborn. Meanwhile, in the east, the three wise men, guided by a special star, came to pay homage by offering gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Jesus' life continued to demonstrate acts of teaching, miracles, and proclamations of the kingdom of God. His teachings about love, forgiveness, and social justice resonated with many, while his growing popularity troubled political and religious leaders of the time. Ultimately, Jesus' journey culminated in his crucifixion, a central event in Christianity, a symbol of sacrifice and redemption. After being betrayed by one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Jesus was arrested. Jesus was put on trial and sentenced to death by crucifixion, a common practice for criminals at the time. He was crucified at Golgotha, and according to Christian tradition, he died to redeem the sins of humanity. His death is commemorated on Good Friday. The crucifixion was not the end of the Christian story, as, according to the New Testament, Jesus.
The Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, one of the most powerful of antiquity, began in the 6th century BC under the leadership of Cyrus the Great. This bold conqueror unified the Persian tribes and led the expansion of a vast territory that stretched across 3 continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. The empire was notable for its innovative administrative structure, which included a system of satrapies, or provinces governed by satraps, representatives of the king himself. This system provided remarkable cohesion across the vast territory. The cultural diversity of the empire was protected under Cyrus, who promoted religious and ethnic tolerance, allowing different cultures to thrive under the Persian aegis. Under Darius I and Xerxes I, Cyrus's successors, the empire reached its peak in terms of infrastructural development and urban planning, manifested in the construction of Persepolis, the ceremonial city and architectural jewel of the empire. However, the splendor of the Persian Empire was not destined to last forever. A number of factors led to its decline, notably the repeated and costly military campaigns against Greece that weakened the state economically. Furthermore, internal problems related to the administration and succession of power generated instability. The Persian decline culminated with the arrival of Alexander the Great. In 334 BC, the young Macedonian king began his campaign against Persia, demonstrating great military skill and determination. The Persians, under Darius III, faced a series of decisive defeats, the most significant at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Alexander subsequently captured Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, marking the decline of the Persian Empire. The legacy of the Persian Empire, however, endured. Its administrative system influenced future political organizations, and its management of diversity served as a model for governance. Furthermore, Zoroastrianism, the empire's predominant religion, left an enduring mark on the spiritual traditions of the Middle East. Thus, even though the empire fell, its influence continued to shape the ancient world and leave a lasting. War in Pearl Harbor, USA. December 7, 1941, is a date that resonates in the world's collective memory. That day, a peaceful Sunday morning in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was abruptly interrupted by a surprising Japanese offensive. The meticulously planned all-out attack caught the American forces off guard, resulting in one of the most devastating events of World War II. The Pearl Harbor Naval Base, located on the island of Oahu, was a vital strategic point for the United States military presence in the Pacific. A little after 7:55 a.m., the first drones began to be heard in the sky. They were Japanese planes cruising the air in precise formations. Within minutes, bombing and gunfire intensified in a furious hail of fire and steel. The commander-in-chief of Japan's combined fleet, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, had meticulously planned the attack. Pinning his hopes and strategies on a brutal strike that would immobilize the American fleet, he intended to open a path for Japanese expansion across the Pacific. More than 350 Japanese aircraft participated in an assault that lasted approximately 90 minutes, from its beginning to its sudden end. Dozens of American ships were destroyed or damaged, including the battleships USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma. The destruction was enormous. More than 2,400 Americans were killed and nearly 1,200 were wounded under the waves of exhausting combat. The psychological impact was equally profound. The notion of invulnerability that the United States had maintained until then was completely shattered. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress the following day, calling the event a date which will live in infamy, and then requested and obtained a declaration of war against Japan. This attack not only changed the course of World War II, but also marked the entry of the United States into the global conflict, shifting the balance of power in favor of the Allies. The story of Pearl Harbor is a vivid reminder of the cost of war and the difficult lessons of diplomacy in a turbulent world. It reflects the power of tactical surprise, but also the resilience of a nation that unites.